All right, welcome to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome to this Q&A. I just want to follow up with one thing spoke about on Sunday, and in the book of Leviticus, and the thing was, a lot of questions came up about immorality and how it applies to non-Jews. So basically said there are things that I would say it's moral imperative, right? That that non-Jews should keep. Let's say the way they dress and other things. Again, not obligated per se, but I would say it's more of a moral imperative. But I would say that even with all that, isn't there a basic level of morality that a non-Jew should have? I mean, Jews, we understand there, a lot of things, we're not allowed to do, not allowed to look at other things. Now, it could be basic moral things non-Jews have to keep, right? They should keep, but you can't necessarily obligate someone to do that, right? Again, we don't necessarily go according to what goes on, in society, because essentially we don't really care what goes on in society. If you're living in Sodom, right, and everything's going on, whatever's going on in Sodom, so you say, well, this is the morality of what's going on. This is what people do. This is how people dress. Okay. Now, with that, is that a good thing? Obviously, we would say, it's not a good thing. At the same time, we'd say, we're not allowed to go after the masses. Not allowed to do what other people do, right? There are plenty of things, plenty of things we're not allowed to do, right? In general. And as the Torah says, in the book of Leviticus chapter 18, I haven't got there yet, but in verse 3, it says you're not allowed to go after the ways of the Egyptians, right? You're not allowed to go after the ways of the Canaanites. Now, the Egyptians were known to be extremely immoral, and the whole chapter, except for a few verses, chapter 18 is all against immorality, right? All against immorality. Now, that being the case, even if we're going to say that things don't apply, maybe certain things may not apply, to non-Jews, but what about basic morality? What does a non-Jew have to keep? Let's keep in mind, so they don't convert. What does a non-Jew have to keep? They have to keep things that are universal according to the Torah, right? Now, universal according to the Torah, according to what the Torah says, right? Not according to what society says or what anyone else is going to say. So they have to keep things that are universal. Very good. So now we'll ask the question, okay, if that's true, doesn't matter the way someone dresses. Now, we get carried away sometimes in externals, as we always say, and because the person dresses a certain way, you expect certain things, right? The way they dress. Okay. Now, some people, let's say, don't dress the way they should, but you don't know what's going on in their heart. So, right, you can't, how do they say? You can't judge a book by its cover. Okay. Now, people could be dressing because, for other reasons. They could be dressing up and doing, whatever they're doing, but inside they're rotten to the core. That you can't have, right? That's contradiction in terms. So, people do interesting things. Okay. So again, I would say, I'm not so into externals, but someone would say, person can dress the way they want. What's the problem with the way, the way a person dresses? So I would think person should have respect for themselves, right? The way they dress. I'm not gonna, guys certainly not gonna, shouldn't, go out in public and look like a slob, right? As we always say, stains on the shirt, not tucked in, this, that, should look impeccable, right? Should definitely look impeccable. someone, is out and okay, they got a stain on the shirt, it's one thing. But going out with stain on the shirt, yeah, for a bit, if someone's a rabbinic scholar, it could be death penalty. Why death penalty? Why so severe? Because you're held to a higher standard, right? But I would think, right, just thinking out loud here, I would think that since everyone's created B'Tselem Elokim, every person is created in God's image. If every person is created in God's image, don't they have an obligation to take care of the body, take care of the soul? The Ramban, Nachmanides says, and Book of Leviticus chapter 19, we'll get there one day, not sure when, right? But the beginning, it says that, the beginning of that chapter says, you should be holy because God himself is holy. So different opinions what that means. What does it mean God is holy? Right? What does that mean? According to one opinion, it means stay away from forbidden relationships. According to another opinion, it means that even though you're allowed to eat, doesn't mean you should be a glutton. Just because you're allowed to drink doesn't mean you should be an alcoholic. Everything, use it within reason. So to speak. Very good. Right? So you got to be in control. Okay. So since we have an obligation to be in control, I can't do what I want. I can't do what I want when I want. There are limitations. Now, the question is, how far do these things go? Is there a basic standard here? So, yeah, for Jews, there's no question, right? It's all pretty clear. Now, there should be, I would think, a basic standard for non-Jews, right? How they should dress, what they should wear, not wear, per se. Yeah, there should be a standard, minimal standard. And we see that any nation that got caught up in, basic desires destroyed themselves, right? Decadence. How the Roman Empire got destroyed. Other empires got destroyed. Decadence. So you see, even by non-Jews, what does that do? It's a breakdown of society. It's a breakdown of morals. And when you have that, the nation can't survive, right? They can't survive. So we've seen that. We've seen that in history. So, so the question really is, do a lot of these things necessarily apply to non-Jews? Right? So there should be a basic standard. There should be a basic standard. Now, not going to be liable for death penalty, necessarily. Right? Probably for many things. Probably won't be liable for death penalty. But I would say, it's a good thing to do. As we would call it, a moral imperative. A person will take themselves more seriously the way they dress. And when a person dresses a certain way, they feel different. A person's like, wearing a tank top and shorts, they feel like going to the beach. Right? Or, you're chilling, whatever. A person wears, a suit, you feel different. Right? You definitely feel different. Doesn't matter what you're dressing up for. Right? That's not necessarily the point. Clothes make the person. How does the person feel? A person can say, yeah, I get dressed up wearing this. I remember after I got married, so we had a wedding reception in the States a month and a half later, right? Something like that, or a few months later. And on the invitation, it said modest dress required. Now, someone says, oh, it's great. I got this, short, a woman talking, obviously. I have this, I shouldn't say obviously today, but it was a woman talking. Said, oh, great. I have this great, short, very short cocktail dress. So in their eyes, that's modest. I mean, like, okay, it's very short. Like, what would be called immodest if that's modest, right? So, I guess we could use our imaginations. Yeah, that's their definition. That's modest. Sleeveless, I'm sure. Right? I don't remember, but probably. Or even if not, whatever, it doesn't matter. But point is, There are limitations, right? There are limitations. They say, but how would a non-Jew not know that? How would they know that? So they're going to say it's always something universal. See, this is where the breakdown of society is. I mean, one place, that people say I can dress, wherever I want, and if I want to show things, I will, and if not, then, it's your fault if you look and all that. Good, true, right? That is true. But some people will dress because they want people to look at them. Okay, yeah, obviously that's bad. But that means they have no value of themselves because they want to show off what they have to other people. So that whole idea, you think about it, is why do people do what they do? That's really the question here. Why do people do what they do? What's the answer? That's what the heart tells them, what their desires tell them, or what their brain tells them. Because if people thought for a split second, maybe they'd be dangerous, I don't know, right? But if people would think, is this good for me? Is this something I should be doing? Now, most people aren't thinking, but okay. But if they would think, would they see a problem with it? Now, I guarantee a lot of people would say, what's the problem? If I dress a certain way, somebody looks, their problem. Why is the person dressed that way? They'll say, I feel comfortable this way. Okay. Right? Feel much more comfortable. Okay. Cold in the winter. So, I'm going to wear this or wear that or whatever. Okay. And summer it's hot, so I'll wear less. Okay. So say it's about comfort. Maybe. But shouldn't there be a basic standard? So someone's going to say, I was never taught that. Right? These type of morals, I was never taught. No one ever said anything. It's a norm. You dress the way you want. It's hot outside. You dress like you're going to the beach. Or not. Whatever. Cover up more, cover up less, or probably cover up less. Whatever it is. Okay. You see, that's the norm. But is the norm right? Yeah, is going according to what people do right? What's the answer? No. Because the values are skewed. Because the question that has to be asked, the obvious question is, why am I doing this? So people pick out clothing and other things because that's what they like, or that's what the style is. A person's not going to wear something they don't like, right? They're going to pick something up because they enjoy it. They like it. It's in vogue. It's what people wear. Okay. But they would never think, what it does. Again, I'm not big necessarily into externals, right? And when you get caught up in externals, you judge people by the way they dress. That you shouldn't do, right? We can't dress someone. Sorry, we can't judge somebody. Slip of the tongue there. You can't judge somebody unless you've been in their shoes. Okay. But the way a person dresses says something. Now they may not think it says anything. They may just think that's the way I dress. But there's something else. There's something else going on there. So, just again, as a follow-up, as we said, there should be a minimal standard for non-Jews, right? There should absolutely be a standard, for non-Jews. And that being the case, person has to think, which again, a lot of people don't, a person has to think, why am I doing this? And most people they pick out what they pick out, they wear what they wear. They don't think about it. They don't think about, the repercussions. Dressing a certain way or whatever. They don't think. Right? Is, a statement I heard, many years ago, when I was in college and university, 1% of the people think, 4% think they think, 95% rather die than think. People don't want to think. It's too hard. It's too, life's too depressing. Because we think what's going on. There's corruption, People lie, people steal, people this, all kinds of things. Life is depressing. Okay. I want to have fun. I want to enjoy. I want to kick back and sip pina coladas. Great. Is that what life is? Life is one major distraction. That's what it is. A lot of background noise. Okay. So the question is, how do I look at it? How do I not get sucked in? Right? Which is really the question here. Right? How do you not get sucked in? It's very easy. Right? It's very, very easy to get sucked in. So the focus has to be to offset the body and what the body wants. The focus has to be on Torah. Right? Someone told me, a parent told them, like, is there anything more important than God? What do you say? It's like God this, God that, and learning and listening and this and that. So he said, no, this is the most important thing. Got to tap in, got to stay focused. That's the most important thing. Right? Even non-Jews, right? Even if they don't have the same obligations as a Jew. Also have to stay focused. Because what happens if you don't stay focused? You get lost. Right? You're just doing things by rote, doing things automatic, and what happens? Right? What happens? You get caught up in everything else. It's easy to do that. Very, very easy to do that. Right? Tell someone who's a news junkie, tell someone who's a sports junkie, tell someone who's a entertainment junkie, whatever. So these things fill their time. They fill their time because they're not in tune. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what mitzvahs they keep and this and that. They're not in tune. You can say, but doesn't everyone have an evil inclination? Yes. Everyone has an evil inclination. True. God doesn't want you to act on it. But we're in this world to be tested. Okay. So how is it that, I mentioned yesterday in a podcast I did, that the soul itself, what does it want? It wants God's approval. The Chov of the Baba says, right? It says, his heart, he wants God's approval. Very good. But the soul needs to be fed. And if you don't feed the soul, so it atrophies. It'll die like anything else. Take a plant, you don't water it, it'll die. Right? So the soul needs spiritual food. Good? Spiritual food, we're going to call it Torah. That's what it needs. Needs spiritual food. Now, the more intense you feed it, the stronger it is. Now, does that mean all of a sudden you become righteous? No. Does that mean you have no more tests? No. But there's a constant battle. So we're living in this constant battle. So there's one way to succeed. There's only one way to succeed. The way to succeed is to stay focused. Now, staying focused means that it doesn't, let's say better, it doesn't mean that, you're going to do everything, and you're going to live to such a high standard as that, you're never going to make mistakes. Doesn't mean that. It means you're going to be tested, a lot. And the question is, how do you pass the test? Do you pass the test? You don't pass the test. That's what life is. Right? The question, though, is how do I see it? What is the perspective? What should I be thinking? And most people will think, once they've made mistakes, even serious mistakes, they're finished. God's never going to listen to my prayers. Why should he ever help me? I'm doomed. Everything's bad. And what's the answer everyone's going to say? Forget about it. Move on. You have to move on. But you have to see what's the base of what I do. In other words, if a person's doing, and this comes up a lot, person's doing the same thing over and over again. That's bad. Whatever it is. So you have to ask the question, why am I doing this? What is causing me to do this? Right? Then what's the second question? There's three steps here. What's the second question? The second question is, okay, I understand, you think about it, you understand why you do it. Okay. What triggers it? What is it that it triggers? Right? That is going to trigger it. That's second question. Third question is, okay, once I understand potentially what triggers it, then I have to figure out how to stop it. Now that's a harder step, right? I would think really probably the hardest step is to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Probably the hardest step. Figuring out how to stop it, yeah, it's also a hard step, but I don't think it's necessarily the hardest step, right? If you try and figure out what, make sure you don't get triggered, how you get around getting triggered, then figure out different ways on stop it. So it's a 3-step process, but what sometimes happens, person gets the first step, they understand what they're doing wrong. And what do? Instead of like digging deep and trying to figure out why, they're miyayish. Miyayish means they give up hope. It's like they give up hope. They're like, this is the way I am. This is the way it is. And that's it. It's too hard to change. Aren't we creatures of habit? We're creatures of habit. 100% we're creatures of habit. So being a creature of habit, it's hard to change. Right? Says Rabbi Israel Salanter, blessed memory, founder of the Muslim movement, to change one character trait. Change one character trait in your life is a good thing. One. He's not telling you 5, he's not telling you 10. You got to work on things, okay. But if you change one completely, that's huge. Right? That is a huge thing. We got a lot of work to do. Right? We have a lot of work to do. So the question is, right? The question is how we're doing things. How are we looking at things? Someone asked me, not going to get into politics, right? As we always say, but someone asked me earlier, what do I think is going to happen? Right? Let's preface it. Secular Jew asked the question. Yeah. What do I think is going to happen in Gaza? Is there going to be peace? Yeah, loaded question. Good. Now, what's the simple answer? You'll never have peace with these people, i.e. the Muslims, until the end of days, till the Messiah comes. Well, I can't say that. Yeah, they're not going to listen to that. So I had one very simple answer. My simple answer was, okay, American government's very keen on getting Hamas out, and you got to get them out. But, they're holding, they got great bargaining chips. They got, they got dead hostages and alive hostages. Yeah, so I said, if you get them out, I said, do you ever wonder why somebody would keep dead bodies around? And there were Jewish dead bodies in different places. Eli Cohen was master spy for the Jewish people, for Israel, in Syria. His body's still there. After they found him out, whatever, they killed him, they hung him, whatever, the body's still there. They haven't allowed him to be brought back to Israel. There are people that have been killed that soldiers been killed years ago, and they're still there. They're still in captivity, still in Gaza somewhere. They haven't relinquished bodies. Now, I understand bargaining chips. They got more dead people than alive that are still there. I get that, but they're holding on to dead bodies. What kind of person hold on to dead bodies? You're going to say smart people because they have, what do you call it? They have leverage. Because they know if they get back all the hostages, what's going to happen? Yeah. Israel's supposed to make a deal, whatever. They're not going to attack. They want them out of there. Right? They want them out of there, but they know if they give them all back and there's no total ceasefire, they know they're toast. Right? So for that, what do you think is going to be? I said you got to get them out. You got to get rid of Hamas. That's what you got to do. But who are you going to put in? You put in Palestinian Authority, they're no better. They're still paying, by the way. They're still paying families of martyrs that have killed Jews or tried to kill Jews. Still paying families monthly stipends. Incentive. You get killed in battle, quote unquote, family gets taken care of. So who are you dealing with? Pick your poison. Is one any better than the other? No. They never relinquished, according to their quote-unquote charter, they've never relinquished the fact that Israel shouldn't be destroyed. They've never relinquished that. They don't recognize Israel. They'll never recognize Israel. They want a state without Jews. They don't want Israel, period. They haven't relinquished that. Now you're going to put them in power. So who's better? Right? So I laid it out in that perspective. So you want to know, what I think is going to be afterwards? I have no idea, but you can't have any of these people in power. Khan, wasn't so in vogue back in the day. Hashem Yikam Damo, God should avenge his blood. He had it right 40 years ago. He had it right. He said, take him on naked buses, send him out of the country. That's what he said. People call him a racist, a fascist, this, that. Right? But he understood. These are what you're dealing with. See, if you don't live in Israel, you don't understand who these people are. Now people around the world, different countries, are starting to see who they are. They're letting some of these people in, and they're causing havoc. That's why nobody wants them. Exactly why nobody wants them. But again, we're not going to get into politics. But the person never really thought about it. Again, what to think about. That was my very simple answer. So who's going to go in? Who's going to take over? All right. Who are the moderates? There are no moderates. Right? They've taken a whole generation. They've radicalized them. In Gaza, in the West Bank, they're all the same. They've been radicalized. Who wants to take in any of these radicalized people? Nobody. Nobody. So who are you dealing with? So the question is, I wanted someone to think. Why do you think someone else coming in is going to be any better? Because the whole preface was, I want there to be peace. Do you think there's going to be peace? And they're like, how have I there be peace? How have I? They want to live in peace. We have no problem. They're still not interested in attacking for the sake of attacking, no matter what anyone says. It's not in the DNA, in the psyche of a Jew to do that. They'll defend themselves when they have to. Okay. And they've always had to defend themselves. But people don't think. I'm going to mention a whole bunch of things. But the whole generation's been radicalized. See, that, after October 7th, the retired general made a comment, didn't really know what he was saying, but, he made a very compelling comment. And that compelling comment was that they've radicalized the whole generation. So, essentially, you got to wipe out everybody. Because they've radicalized everybody. Like, how are you going to de-radicalize them now? Why do I say he didn't know what he was saying? Because this was the command God gave in Samuel chapter 1, Samuel 1, chapter 19. Chapter 50. Talks about the command by Samuel the prophet to King Saul to wipe out Amalek, right? Getting closer to Purim here, a couple days. So what happened? He didn't do it. He didn't do exactly what he should have. Left the king alive, left the best of the flock alive, and the king shacked up with someone, and then we get Haman. Now, why did God say wipe out everyone? You're going to say, what do women and children do? Yeah, and that's the answer. That's exactly the answer. What this general said, they're all radicalized. They're all part of one group. They've all been taught the same thing. I.e., there's no supernatural. Brought doubt to the world. That's what I'm going to try and figure out. Try and figure out on Purim, depends how much I drink. Right? The numerical value of Amalek and Suffolk, right? Every letter, Gematria, every letter has a numerical value. Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3. The numerical value of Amalek is the same as Suffolk, as doubt. They brought doubt to the world, doubt and supernatural. Now, it's just interesting also, Baruch Mordechai, and, blessed be Mordechai, and Ara Haman, and cursed be Haman, also same gematria, same numerical value. Now, if you can figure out that numerical value, you haven't drank enough, right? Yeah, you try and do the math, right, to see how much you're going to be able to do there. Okay, but it's not a coincidence here. Gematria in general, numerical value and comparing different things, doesn't make someone religious. It is interesting though; it does tell certain things. Suffolk and Amalek, yeah. That's Amalek brought atheism to the world. Biggest doubt in the world. That's the supernatural. Yeah, that's significant because we're living in that world. We're for sure living in that world. You know how many Christians are religious and Buddhists and this and that. Yeah, you got plenty of people who are atheists out there. Plenty. Yeah, you got millions that are atheists. You got all the communists and whatever. You got plenty. Still out there. That's what they brought to the world. Right? When you bring that to the world, then people doubt everything. Right? People doubt everything. And that's what we have. That's exactly what we have. That's the world we live in. So what do we have to do? What's our obligation? Jews and non-Jews. We got to tap into what God wants. What one wants. Someone there mentions, my husband's rabbi frowns drinking too much. Okay. You drink more than you normally do. Some people get out of control. Yeah. If the only point is to get rip-roaring drunk, that's not the point. Then you miss the whole point. You miss out on mitzvahs, you miss out on prayer. There are many things you miss out on. Right? And if a person's going to say things, people are going to, say things they shouldn't, or they're not going to be able to pray to other things they shouldn't drink, or drink much less. Right? So if a person drinks a little more than they normally do, they go to sleep, they fulfill the mitzvah of not knowing the difference between Haman, blessed be Haman, blessed be Mordechai, and cursed be Haman. Right? You don't know the difference. You're asleep. You can't know the difference. Right? So as we say, Nichnas Yain Yoitzasoid, when the wine goes in, secrets come out. But what should it be? Not just a person getting plastered and saying all kinds of crazy things. What should be? Kirva HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It should be drawing close to God. That's what it should be. It should be crying over the Beis Hamikdash. We don't have a temple anymore. Sanctifying the physical is a much harder thing than Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, you fast all day, right? Fast at night, during the day. It's a long fast. Feel like a piece of dirt. It's all about repentance. Very good. Easy to get in the mood. Yeah, because you're fasting. You're not eating. But how do you sanctify God's name? By eating and feasting. So then you see the true person that comes out. Are they just spewing garbage or not? Right? Are they spewing garbage or not? So someone asked, are people in Gaza from Haman? So, they make the claim. They make the claim that, they go straight to Yishmael. Okay. The problem is, Sancherib came and messed up all the nations. Since he messed up all the nations, nobody knows who anybody is. None of the nations can say, I come directly from this or that or the other thing. They're messed up. Messed up. There's a Netziv from Naftali Tzvi, Berlin. Berliner, he was the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin, after Rav Chaim of Volozhin, of blessed memory. His commentary on Chumash, the Emek HaDavar, that's his commentary on Chumash. And in Genesis, it talks about Per Adam, calls Yishmael a wild man. So the Emek HaDavar says, what does it mean, a wild man? Right, that his hands are in everybody, everyone's hands are in his, meaning he's ownerless. His life is ownerless. But he went further. And he said, an offshoot of Yishmael will never persecute an offshoot of Yishmael. In other words, a Muslim will persecute any non-Muslim, right? They show great hospitality. They're known to have great hospitality. Okay. But he says they'll never attack someone who's a Muslim. Now, you could easily ask the question, okay, you got the Sunnis, and the Shiites. You got people killing each other left and right. Among the Muslims, I'm not talking about Muslims killing Christians or whatever. Muslims killing Muslims. Right? So you can say, well, he missed the boat, right? Right? But he's saying in his day, you would never see such a thing. You would never see a Muslim killing another Muslim. Now, what could the answer be? What changed? What changed over here? That you see that Muslims will kill other Muslims. Where do you see the change? And I think a simple answer or a possible answer is that what do you see? They don't come from Ishmael. They are a mixture. They're not pure here. Not a purebred. Everyone goes direct to Ishmael. Because if what the Netziv says is true, and he says in his day never saw such a thing, never heard such a thing, Muslim would attack another Muslim? Never. So what changed? So who says they're pure going all the way back to Ishmael? If Ishmael really messed them up, if Sancheiriv mixed up all the nations, so nobody can say, except for the Jewish people, nobody can say that they descend from this one, that one, the other one. They can't. They can't say that. Why not? Because all the population got messed up. So no one has direct connection to anything. So you have a Shiite against the Sunni. That shouldn't happen. According to the Steve, it shouldn't happen. But if all the populations got messed up, so no one's direct. So no one's is truly bred from Yishmael and goes straight to Yishmael. No. Right? It veers off. How does it veer off? Because you had population exchanges. You know, messed up thing, what he did. So nobody knows who anyone is. You can't say directly this, directly that, directly the other thing. Right? Right? Wherever they are, doesn't matter. Right? That's not the point. So someone says, well, the people in Gaza are from Haman, but Amalek comes from all over the world, right? Amalek comes from everybody. So many would say, the mixed multitude are Amalek, fighting against Torah. That's the Israeli government. That's secular Jews. Right? The Vilna Gaon talks about who the Erev Rav is. And Evan Shlema. Any, secular Jew who's the head of whatever institution, they're part of the Erev Rav. Part of the mixed multitude. Mashiach cannot come until they're all wiped out, until they all die. But you see clear as day, certainly in Israel, you got the greatest amount of, purity, right? Strongest amount of Torah here. And also you have greatest amount of impurity, right? You got the gay capital of the world in Tel Aviv. So they both fight against each other. But you see that what's the government doing and has been doing for years? Fighting against Torah. Right? So people would say, well, if you didn't have Orthodox Jews in the government, it'd be a lot worse. Okay. Well, it comes with, with another point. And that is that this desecration of Shabbos going on and Orthodox Jews are in the government, they get blamed for it also. In other words, they have a hand in it. Why? They say, we didn't tell them to do that. We don't want them to do that. So why? So with coalition. So they're getting kickback. Something's going on. They're looking the other way. Right? But you're guilty by association. Right? So my Rabbi would say, and people like him would say, they're guilty by association. It can't be part of the government. Now, other people would say, if you're not part of the government, then we lose out a lot more. Okay, that's true. That's the majority opinion. That is definitely the majority opinion. But it comes at a price. It does come at a price. But at the same time, you got to realize that, anyone who's going to fight against Torah, Jews, who are going to fight against Torah, I mean, like really fight against Torah, Take away money from yeshivas. Whether they should take it or not, it doesn't matter. It's not the point. Try and destroy, young Orthodox Jews, put them in the army, right? Other things, right? We're not going into these issues. But the point is they're fighting against Torah. They are fighting a major battle against Torah. They brought in more than 1 million Russians to offset the other Orthodox Jews, which they set themselves years ago. And they know all these non-Jews coming in are non-Jews. Sorry, all these Russians are non-Jews. They know that. And there were Orthodox Jews in the Ministry of Interior. They allowed them in. They knew that. Right? Statistics show it. But they admitted themselves. They're going to offset the ultra Orthodox because they're not having kids. Ultra Orthodox will be the majority at some point. Right? Everyone else is going to die out. So they understand it's fear. Going to be a theocracy. Going to make women shave their heads. Yeah. People are afraid. People are afraid. So, these type of things, you got to see what it is. And they're waging war, financially, other ways. Rabbi Wein should be well. One of the foremost Jewish historians, the last century. I once heard him speak. He was on the radio here. And he once said, there's a lot of very strong rhetoric, right? Certainly among Jews. There's a lot of strong rhetoric. He said, what they talk about Orthodox Jews, call them parasitim, parasites, call them all kinds of things, all kinds of things. And so Rabbi Wein says, if you would change the name Orthodox Jew to Arab, with all these vilifications, it would have been a civil war. Would have absolutely been a civil war. But there's reason here, right? There's good reason here. Because they're out to destroy Torah. That's what they want. They want to destroy Torah. They want to make us like them. That's what they want. That's exactly what they want. So anyone who wants to destroy Torah, talking about Jews, right? It could be non-Jews also, but we're talking about Jews. Anyone who wants to uproot that and fight against it, that's Amalek. So why is so many people passionate? Why are they so passionate about it? Because they know they have that spark. They know what the truth is. It's a joke. They say, the synagogue I don't pray in is Orthodox. Right? They know what the truth is. They know what the truth is. They choose, not to do things and whatever. But essentially what happens, they're fighting against Torah. So anybody who's going to fight against Torah, that's part of Amalek. Because they don't want to believe in the supernatural. They want to see things happen by nature. All these things. Very good. But there's a constant battle. So in the places where you have the strongest amount of Torah, you got to have people that are against it. And a number of years ago, there are plenty of places that take money from the government, part of the budget, right? Depending on whose power, right? So they fund a lot of these places, a lot of these, Orthodox places. Now, so there's an expression, Bala Mea, Bala Deya. The one who has 100, people want to hear what they have to say, right? Anyone remember the, E.F. Hutton commercial, right? E.F. Hutton, right? And then everyone's listening. Yeah? Everyone's listening, what they have to say. Someone's got money, people listen to what they have to say. So what they do, or what they try to do, they want to push their own curriculum. They want secular studies in yeshivas. They want to change the curriculum, or add things to the curriculum. Right? So they fought against it. So you don't have a right to do that. We have generation after generation. This is how we learn. This is what we do. We're not interested in changing the curriculum. Yeshivas closed in Europe because of that. Even like in Russia, they wanted 1 hour a week, or maybe a day. It's like 1 hour a day to learn Russian. Yeah? They shut down the yeshivas rather than do that. Think about benefit, not benefit, because they're going to add other things also. That's why, they said, they're going to add this, going to add that, so they just shut down the yeshiva. So, in this case, so back to my case here. So they want to change the curriculum. Add things to the curriculum. So I told my Rabbi point blank, that's what they get for taking money. Because there are plenty of places, that don't take money from the government for exactly this reason. So they're not beholden to the government. So he said it doesn't matter, you still have to fight against it. Right? They're not allowed to put their, to add things to our curriculum. But they're paying the bill. They're paying a good chunk of the bill. He says, doesn't matter. I said, if they're taking money, it comes at a price, a potential price. He said, you still have to protest against it. Still have to say it's not right. Okay. So, it goes both ways. It goes both ways. They don't have a right to say what we should teach or not. We have rabbis to say what they should teach or not. They don't have, we don't care what they have to say. I had to give them money, good. So they have an ability to help strengthen Torah. Chazon Ish of Avram Shai Karo with a blessed memory, once said that the merit of state of Israel to exist, the state of Israel, I'm not talking about when Messiah comes. The state of Israel to exist is the fact that the government plays a role in helping out yeshivas and helping out girls' schools. That is their way to exist, and that the state should exist. He says, once that stops, and once they take money away, then they lose the ability to exist. What does that mean practically? Practically means that they don't have any merit here. If they're going to take money away, if they're going to give money to yeshivas and girls' schools, that's a huge merit. That's a huge merit. So God can say, okay, no matter what's going on, within reason, Jewish people should stay. They're not going to be exiled. Bad things shouldn't happen. Okay. Now, once you get a leftist government in there, right, and you're going to say, well, we're not going to do it. We're going to take money away, make it even harder. So, I would say that's not necessarily a bad thing. Heads of institutions are going to have to, raise that money, which would be harder. That's true. You're not beholden to them. Right? You're not beholden to them. But once that happens, it has happened in previous governments where, they, in leftist governments, they did exactly that. So then what happens? The entire country's in danger. Because this is a merit for them. The merit is the strengthening Torah. It's a merit. It's a huge merit for them. But if they take away money, whether they should give it or not, a person thinks they should give it or not, that's not the point. But if they take away money and they make it much harder, they're going to suffer. The whole place is going to suffer. Chazon Ish went so far to say, we're not going to be here. In other words, we get booted right out or taken over because of that. That's how strong it is. That's how strong it is. Somebody asks, do I have any recommendation of the best community to live in Israel after making Aliyah? Depends where a person wants to go. It depends, what they can afford there. Someone's looking for, let's say, an English-speaking community, only a handful. There are only a handful. Communities in Jerusalem and outside Jerusalem are, cost a lot. Where would I recommend? It depends. I would say that, a person should stay in a religious place. Not a far out place. Sometimes people will stay in far out places and it's becoming more religious because it's cheaper. And they're not building fast enough, which, is its own problem, supply and demand. And, if someone wants to live in a community that's been established for a long time, you're going to pay through the nose. It's just, the way it is. Where I live, prices have gone up 3 times in the last 15 years. Right? They've tripled. And, but you're living in a war zone. Like it's pretty amazing Prices have never gone down. People keep saying like they're going to level off, they're going to level off. People are going to pay what they're going to pay, whatever it's going to be. So, would I tell someone, unless they have a job somewhere, to go live in Haifa? I mean, Haifa does have a religious community there, number of religious communities there, but it's mostly secular. Yeah, there are a lot of places that, there are religious communities that are mostly secular, right? You don't find it in Jerusalem. You don't find it, certainly where I live and other places around Jerusalem, Bnei Brak, and a few other places that they're totally religious, right? Those are the best places to be. But again, might not be cost efficient, and the person wants, they speak English. They're not gonna, it's gonna take them a while to learn Hebrew, this and that. So there are a handful of religious communities, handful, that speak English. One of them is a Beit Shemesh, right? So I would say, you practice your English, you go move there, right? I don't know, there are like 5 parts of Beit Shemesh, right? You got Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, you got a lot of young people living there, right, as well. But usually, I think in Aleph, that's where I used to live. It's the majority are English speakers. But, I mean, obviously, got to speak Hebrew also, but like, someone's gonna go. That's one place to go. For English speakers, another place is Harnov, where I learn every day. But it's in Jerusalem, and it's also an older community as well. But there are some young people there, but it's not cost efficient, very expensive to live there. But it depends. It depends. There are only a handful of English, speaking communities. It's a community up north that I was trying to help for a while, right outside Tiberias. A lot of English speakers there, as well as no infrastructure. Right, no infrastructure for kids. A lot of, they don't have schooling there, so they send their kids elsewhere. It's English speaking community, somewhat in Afula, which is about an hour and a half, I would say, outside of Jerusalem. But Sfats, all the way up north, has a lot of English speakers there also, but there are a lot of hippies up there, and a lot of different walks of life out there. But there are some people that like it up there. It's very a lot of Kabbalists up there, whatever. But pure English speaking places is you don't find too many. Then we don't find too many. Rabbi Shemesh is yeshivas. Yeah, there's a modern area there. It's also there's a modern area there in Beit Shemesh also, right? I would say it's more modern Orthodox, but yeah, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, and Hey are they're yeshivas, right? They're mostly English. In Aleph they're mostly English speakers, but it's a mixture, right? There is a mixture, definitely a mixture there. But yeah, when you get to Beis, Gimel, Dalet, they're mostly ultra Orthodox. There is a community. There is a community that's more an Orthodox community in Beit Shemesh itself, right? There are religious Zionist communities. I mean, some in Jerusalem, a lot outside Jerusalem. But again, a person's gonna have to make a choice. A person who wants to come to Israel, you make a choice. Either I'm going to be ultra Orthodox, right? You're going to live in an ultra Orthodox community, or you'll be a religious Zionist. But religious Zionists are not. I wouldn't say they're doing so well today. And the reason is because some of them are very strong. I'm not going to say not. Some of them, some of the places where they live, very, very strong, and some of them are very wishy-washy. Extremely wishy-washy. So they, I'm not going to say they die out, but they're much weaker. Communities are much weaker. In many ways, I'm not saying all of them, right? Definitely not saying all of them. There are strong communities, but you got to make a choice. You can't be in the middle. In the middle, you won't find your place. Very hard place to find, right? If you're in the middle, right? You won't find your place. There are places that have started up. It's one in Givat Ze'ev. Also, that's for Americans, also okay, but there are only a handful. So again, either you're gonna want to fit. There's 2 groups. It's basically 2 groups, or it's secular, right? They're basically 2 groups. Either you're gonna be religious Zionist, right? What I call more Orthodox, but pretty much the same. Some places are gonna be stronger, some weaker. A lot of them weaker, I would say. bunch of them weaker, but or you're going to be ultra Orthodox. That's it. Nothing in between, right? And there's nothing in between. I'm just, just going to say for the record, it's a good thing we're recording, right? I'm going to say for the record that, the modern Orthodox religious Zionist places are not strong. Most of them are not so strong, right? And, they're not producing Torah giants like an Orthodox community. It's not even close, right? There's no discussion. It's not, I'm not saying they're not strong people that learn, whatever, in these communities, but it's no comparison because the main focus in ultra-Orthodox communities is learning. That's why a number of years ago there were 22 rabbinic court judges that were appointed, by the chief rabbinate. 15 out of 22 came from the ultra-Orthodox community. It's about 58%. That's, let's say it's 60%. That's pretty significant, right? It's not because of discrimination. It's based on knowledge. Right? That's exactly why I left the modern Orthodox community for that reason. Because I was afraid I'd never learn anything or never, learn a little bit here, a little bit there, become a rabbi, this, that. No. Right? You got to learn everything. Right? And that's not the focus by them. Learning is not necessarily the focus. Some more, some less, but it's not the focus. And that's why they won't produce. So I'm not saying they don't have Torah giants. They have their own Torah giants. Yeah? But why won't they produce? For that reason. For that reason. So it says my son was very religious and learns in Stati Lumi. Okay. There are stronger ones, there are weaker ones. Yeah. There are some that are strong. I've met plenty that are weak. Right? I'm not saying across the board. Right? I'm not going to be misquoted. I'm not saying they're all bad. I'm not going to say that. There are plenty that are strong. Right? I got people learning Mirkaz Rav in Jerusalem. Yeah. They're very strong. Okay. The vast majority, I wouldn't say the vast majority. Could be a lot of them, whatever, but I wouldn't say the majority is strong. Just what I've seen. That's what I've seen in general. Someone asked, converting in Judaism easy in Israel, outside of Israel? Outside. Much harder here. You got to live here, and you got to find a way to stay legal here. Right? And, either come on a work permit or play the game with a visa, with a tourist visa. You got to leave the country like every 6 months or whatever. Right? Unless you get accepted to a program that allows you to stay for at least a couple of years. There's only one program that allows that right now. Couple program that allows someone to do that, which I wouldn't recommend. I definitely wouldn't recommend because I've seen people come out of them and whatever. Let's just say it's it's problematic. So it's it's one of my short-term, long-term goals is to have something here and have a proper thing. It hasn't. We're not there yet. I think I'm getting closer, but not there yet. But something needs to be done, right? If people want to come here, it's harder to come here, right? Because they have to live here, and it's it's not an easy place to live because of the language, because of the culture, plus the fact of where you're going to go learn, right? Like I said, it's only a handful of places, right? You count them on less than one hand where a person can go and whatever. So I would say that it's much harder, much harder to convert it. It's much easier to convert elsewhere. Even if places, I'm going to get hammered on this, but even in places where it seems it's impossible to convert, there are places outside of Israel that are hard to convert also. Good. Not as hard as here. Israel is probably the hardest place to convert. I hear a lot of people say, yeah, I want to come, I want to learn this and that. Okay, so I got a massive project I'm working on now. So hopefully, very near future, it's going to get off the ground. So once it gets off the ground, so then it's a different issue, right? Then it's a very different issue. But we're not there yet. So these other programs I don't think are worth very much. There's a women's program somewhere where they claim that they're in contact with the chief rabbinate and they accept their candidates. Well, it's a crapshoot. It's not a guarantee. I had a student went through them. I warned them not to do it, and I don't know if they ended up finishing converted or not, but they got rejected by the chief rabbinate. I don't know why. Know exactly why. But they claim like, okay, we're going to bring you for the chief rabbinate, and like you're going to go through this course, and everything's going to be great, but it's not a guarantee. 100% is not a guarantee. Yeah, they claim it's more of a guarantee, but it's not. They got a lot of, letters of approbation and different things, but it's not a guarantee. Right? I told this person it's not a guarantee. If they convert, they go through it, okay. If it works out, great. Didn't work out. I don't know if it worked out in the end, but as of a while ago, it didn't work out. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't know if there were politics involved, other things, right? But they're making a claim that's not true, which is something I can't stand. Yeah, you have to tell people it's not a guarantee. I mean, they don't want to tell people that because then people won't come. Good, but you have to make that clear. We'll facilitate. We're connected to chief rabbinate, this and that, but they can't tell you 100%. They can't say that the person's going to go through it and they're going to convert. Can't make that promise, right? They seem to be leading people on saying, they're going to do that. They're going to make sure it happens. Okay. The person's going to fork over however much money to do it. And then let's say that happens to student of mine. They get there and they didn't convert them. And they want to live here. That's kind of a problem. They went through this problem. They're pushing, they were doing things. I don't know what happened in the end. Right? I do know they got rejected though. So if you have a program that's supposed to, facilitate that, and you're going to tell them like, it's guaranteed, it's lock and key, everything's great and it'll be taken care of and you got nothing to worry about. That's not necessarily true. Again, people say, well, you can't guarantee. You're right, I can't guarantee either. 100%. Right? But if I train someone and they have the knowledge and they get rejected because of politics, that's not my fault. Right? No one's going to come to me. That's not my fault. Right? That's definitely not my fault. But if someone comes in prepared, they know what they're supposed to know, then all things being equal, they should be able to convert. Right? If there are no other issues. So I've had 20 people that have been very successful, converted, did what they need to do, went in front of the rabbinical court, answered what they need to do, and that was it. Right? They're able to convert. However long it took, doesn't matter. There are things that can happen in the process. There are things that can happen, okay. But, no one can make any guarantee. The guarantee is, two things guaranteed in life, death and taxes, right? Not necessarily in that order. That can be guaranteed. I know I'm good at what I do. People do what they should do. They learn, they review, whatever. They go in front of a rabbinical court. They should be able to convert. They should be able to convert unless other things happen. Why is it so hard to convert? Why do you think? Do you think we want anybody? Do you think the Jewish people want any Tom, Dick, and Harry? They don't want anyone Tom, Dick, and Harry. They want people that are going to be able to commit and do what they need to do. So they have to go through a grinder. It has to be harder for them. I'm not going to say it's supposed to be impossible, but they have to be tested. They have to be tested. Being an Orthodox Jew is not an easy thing. It's not supposed to be an easy thing. I'm not saying it's supposed to be impossible. I'm not saying it should take 10 years, right? But we want the real deal. We don't want any pretenders, and a person has to understand life doesn't always go the way we think. And there are setbacks, and there are drawbacks, right? And there are drawbacks, yeah? So a person has to see. They have to be put through a test and see, how they're going to be effective. What are they going to do? Are they going to be a wuss and not be able to take it? Some people can't take it, right? But we want the cream of the crop. That's why only less than 20% actually finish the process, because we want the cream of the crop. We want people that are not going to wilt under pressure, right? They have to feel pressure, right? But they have to feel this is the most important thing. They're not going to waver. We don't need wavering Jews. You know what? We got 13 million wavering Jews, or not wavering Jews, that know nothing. Yeah, we don't need more. Plenty of mediocrity in the world. We're not looking for mediocrity. You want mediocrity or less than mediocrity? Go get a reform conversion. Go get a conservative conversion. That's less than mediocrity. Yeah, you want to be the real deal? You got to fight for it. You got to want it more than anything else, says King Solomon in Proverbs. You want Torah? You got to fight for it. It's going to be worth to you more than diamonds, gold, rubies. You got to want it more than anything else. If you don't want it more than anything else, we're not interested. What about all the wishy-washy Jews? Who cares? Screw them. We don't need them. They're ruining Judaism. So what? And nothing to do with anything. Zero to do with anything. They have their own calculation what God's going to do with them. Okay. No matter what they know, what they don't know. It's irrelevant. You want to come in, you got to be the best you can be. And it might be a grind, and it might be hard, and it might seem impossible. Okay. But we don't need mediocrity. We're not interested in mediocrity. And people say, but that doesn't have to be so hard. That's not the point. That is not the point. Person has to fight for it. It's one of the hardest things to acquire in the world. There are three: Torah, Olam Haba, and the land of Israel. Torah, you have to acquire it. You have to work hard. Why should be given? Why should a person think it should be so easy? Person wants to be a Christian, very easy. Or to be a Muslim, a Hindu, and that's not so rigorous. Okay. But we want to stick with someone. Someone's going to go through this process, they have to learn so many things and change their life. So after the fact, they go through it, it should stick with them. And they should keep it and whatever, no matter what happens. So it's not a guarantee. Someone asked me, I don't have a stat on it. What's the percentage of people that convert and go back and just like end up becoming secular or whatever afterward, down the line? I don't know what the stat is. Anyone I've worked with, I haven't had anyone gone sour afterwards. I'm not bragging, right? But most people, they have issues, whatever, they'll come to me, and I'll hopefully help them with it, right? But at the end of the day, life is hard. Life is hard, and being a Jew is even harder. So that's why only the few are going to survive. See, if there's a big test and you became a mediocre Jew, you're not going to pass the test. Kiss the cross or die as a mediocre Jew. What would some people do? They'll kiss the cross. Some. I'm not saying everybody. So if it's a very weak generation, we don't want mediocrity. We want the best. We want the people that are going to commit to the most. That's the way it sticks, no matter how hard it is. Right? I know too many people that are wishy-washy. Judaism will die that way. It will die that way. Someone asked, what does it mean converting Judaism through the IDF Rabbi? Do not do that. Do not do that. It's a kiss of death. A number of years ago, 5,000 Israelis went through the chief rabbinate in the army and converted without accepting mitzvahs. 5,000. I was at a wedding with a grandson of my Rabbi. After this happened, three of his grandsons cornered me. They're like, you have anything to do with that? I'm like, nope. My hands are clean. A rabbi works for the chief rabbinate. I see every day. He works for the chief rabbinate in divorce cases. So I asked him about this question, this exact question. I said, how many conversions done on a kibbutz, let's say? Yeah, certain kibbutzim that are sanctioned by the chief rabbinate. How many of them worthwhile? He goes, 1 in 1,000. I said, 1 in 1,000? He said, 1 in 1,000. He said, if we know someone converted to one of these kibbutzes, they're getting divorced, we just mess up the get, the bill of divorce because they're not Jewish. He said 1 in 1,000 is what he told me. Just repeating what he said. Now, I had somebody a number of years ago call me. They wanted to date someone that converted in the army. So I said, okay, what's the question? I said, well, this woman doesn't, dress so modest. I said, okay. I said, she keep kosher. So I don't think so. I said, she keep Shabbos. He says, no. I said, so why do you want to date her? Supposedly he's an Orthodox Jew, yeah. So I said, why do you want to date her? Didn't like that question, right? So he came back and said, but she converted in the army. I said, okay. So I told him the story. 5,000 in the army. So I said, if she doesn't keep Shabbos, if she doesn't keep kosher, how can she convert? How did they convert her? What's the answer? Don't know. So I said to somebody that, these 5,000 conversions, I would have taken, I said, I want a percentage of that. I said, you don't want that money. That money you don't want. So you're going to tell me the chief rabbinate is corrupt? That's why I don't work with them if I don't have to. Right? Someone wants to convert, I'll help them. Right? But, down the line, I may have to be involved with them if I want to do what I want to do. Right? So I want them to, if they want them to accept my conversion. What I do. But just keep in mind one thing. There are a number of rabbinical courts in the world that if someone converted to chief rabbinate, they will not accept it. They won't accept it because they don't hold to the standard there. One of them is London, by the way, based in London. Now, they're very thorough, probably one of the most thorough rabbinical courts in the world. They will not accept it. So now you want to tell me person went through the chief rabbinate? A lot of them are bad. I'm not going to say all of them. I won't say all of them. Probably a lot of them are bad. Most of them are bad. Yeah. Someone says, I know someone that went through that. She got embarrassed in the end, but she may. Okay. There are some that will go through it. That's okay. I'm telling you, 5,000 went in and it was not taking on mitzvahs. So what does that tell you? I'm not going to say all of them are bad. I'm not going to say that. A lot of them are. Right? A lot of them are. So, then someone's going to ask me, so, okay, so why do you want to get involved with them? So I don't. I have no interest in getting involved with them. Right? But if someone wants to come and live here and be legal according to the, according to Ministry of Interior, they have to go with the chief rabbinate. That's the only game in town. It's one other rabbinical court a person can go to, it's just not accepted, right? Which I have a connection to in Bnei Brak, but it's not accepted by the chief rabbinate only because of politics. It's a mess. And in short, I would tell you it's a mess to convert here. It's not going to get any better, per se. I don't think it's necessarily going to get any better, but, for what I want to do, if people want to come, then I want to make sure that it's recognized there. I mean, I'll take them to Bnei Brak first, go to the chief rabbinate afterwards, whatever, if they want to live here. Right? That's it's a different issue. It's a different issue. Yeah, let me see other questions. Someone asked, was there a time change start an hour earlier? Yes. Put that on my post. I should have said that when I sent out the links. The reason is because America changed the clocks. Since America changed the clocks, an hour earlier. Hour earlier, anyone who doesn't change the clocks, even some places in America don't change the clocks. Like in Arizona, other places don't change the clocks, right? So if everyone outside of America, i.e. Europe and everywhere else, it's an hour earlier. Yeah. Someone asked, still curious about my costume for Purim. Okay, you'll stay curious, right? I don't think I'm going to reveal it right now, but you'll find out about it. I'm sure people find out about it after the fact. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. If there are no questions, I'm going to sign out. Thursday, there will not be a Q&A because of the fast of Esther. So I wish anyone who's going to fast or celebrate Purim to have a happy and festive Purim. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com. Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As, Ethics of Our Fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, RabbiChaimKaufman@gmail.com, RBBI, CHAIMCOFMAN at gmail.com. Wish everyone goods. Beginning of the day.